Once again, we welcome you to Moving Forward with Young Voices. And we are very happy to welcome a new contributor this week. Her name is Anna Mays. And Anna, since this is our first time meeting you, take a moment and tell our listeners about who you are and what you do.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for having me on. It is a pleasure to be here. As you said, my name is Anna Mays. I am a graduate from Grove City College, where I majored in economics. And I'm now a contributor for Young Voices, where I write about the intersection of economics, culture, and faith.
That's got to be an interesting place to explore because there's a lot of interests that converge there. I'm looking at an article that you had published in the Christian Post about the title is "Why is the NFL more popular than the church?" And I got to tell you, that pulled me right in because we've seen a lot of shifts societally and culturally over the years, and they usually happen slow enough that it kind of takes us by surprise. One day you look around and go, hey, there are no payphones anymore, or something like that. But in some ways, that one kind of hit me between the eyes. The NFL, they don't seem to have much problem filling those stadiums. Well, church attendance seems to be on the decline. What's the story behind this headline?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think that was kind of the question where I started. And I was like, we have more alternatives, I guess, that we could use with our Sunday time instead of going to church. And so I read this really fantastic article by Jonathan Gruber and Daniel M. Hungerman. And they discussed how a couple of decades ago, once the repeal of blue laws happened in the United States, so Sunday commerce was no longer restricted, there was a decline in church attendance. And I think we've seen throughout history, we can go back to the holy day sports in 17th century England, to the Puritans, to the Blue Laws, to last Sunday when you're watching Netflix. This has been a continual issue. And I think the more fundamental question there is actually not why is the NFL doing better than the church, but why is the church even competing with the NFL?
That's a good question. And isn't it interesting too that those differences that we see taking place, in particular that shift.
Mhm.
I don't even think about the blue laws just because that's one of those subtle things that kind of came
Mhm.
and went. I remember when Sundays meant you're not going to find hardly any place open. But
Mhm.
now it's rare to find a place that's closed. Oh, I'm kind of surprised they wouldn't be open because it's a day of commerce.
Right, absolutely.
So talk to me about when we examine the larger issue here. You're right. The NFL and church really shouldn't be in the same competition there. But how did those lines get blurred? What was it that caused people to migrate towards sporting events more so than church? Or was it just the fact that church was no or Sunday was no longer held out as a different day?
Well, I think there's, as I alluded to, it's always been an issue of whether there were laws in place or not of what you did on Sunday aside from going to church. And I think it's really tempting as the church to fall into this trap of, oh, people rather go to brunch or rather hang out with their friends or rather sleep in than come to a church service. And so you end up feeling like you're in competition with all of these other worldly institutions. But fundamentally, the church itself is the body of Christ, and so it is definitely nothing less than an institution, but it is altogether different. And so it's really interesting to see not only that a lot of people, myself for a long time included, view these as like direct substitutes instead of attending to your church, when in reality, Netflix in no way, shape, or form should be even remotely a sufficient substitute for the kind of value you get from church, from community, from fellowship with, the body of Christ.
You point out in your article too that uh, the content that churches have been providing has in some cases been watered down
Mhm.
to make it more I don't know, more easily digestible or more appealing to the crowd. But there's something to be said for churches that really require something of a personal sacrifice to be a part of.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's this way that we have fallen into that trap, but some churches really are excellent, at doing what they are called to do. And I think that is just the case throughout human history. Sometimes we follow better and sometimes we follow worse. Um, but the churches that we see that are successful, across the world, in my article, I specifically talk about the United States, but it's the churches that are rooted in Christ, that are rooted in truth, beauty, and goodness. And it's not the churches that are watered down to match the rest of these worldly institutions. Ultimately, if you're trying to provide comfort or entertainment or humor or pleasure or a pat on the back, you're going to be worse than the other worldly institutions that are in place to do that.
That's oh man, this cuts across so many different stress lines in our
Mhm.
culture. And you point out in your article too here, some people say, well, churches need to adapt or they need to die, but there are some places, and I think you make the case here that the churches that seem to be thriving are the ones that have held the line,
Yeah.
spiritually, doctrinally. They haven't tried to uh, become more popular with the world so much as to be more true to their grounding principles.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mentioned a lot of different statistics in my article. I talked about the Presbyterian Church, the United States. They recently lost 140 congregations, a million members, 100 and I believe around 50,000 of which were active members, so regular attenders, active in the church, active in the community. And currently, we're watching the United Methodist Church, again, another prominent denomination in the United States. They're undergoing one of the biggest interdenominational fractures to date. You have thousands and thousands of churches leaving this denomination and they're fleeing, to the Global Methodist Church and other areas that are holding that line.
Wow. So okay, let's look at the other side of that equation. And are there churches that are prospering, whether that's here in America or worldwide? Are we seeing churches that are actually growing in numbers that have not essentially watered themselves down?
Yeah, absolutely. I think a big name that a lot of people recognize is the Grace Community Church. They have continued to grow and prosper under the doctrine of Jesus Christ. They understand truth, beauty, and goodness, and they're not afraid about causing offense in the name of truth, goodness, and beauty because they know they can't be more loving than God.
I love that. There's a line here too in your article that I think just this deserves to be shouted out, and that's theological orthodoxy is not alienating. That's what sustains Christians' faith. And how did the churches lose sight of this? Any answers?
I think it's a variety of things, but I think it's what we got to at the beginning of this conversation. I think we've fallen into the trap that in order to appease people, we need to become more like the world. And the reality is that is never the answer because if we're followers of Christ, we know that that is exactly what he told us not to do.
Right, right. Okay, one more quick question. We've got just about a minute left here. As it pertains to, I'm going to use Generation Z, but I'm going to use the term younger people. It seems that there is a resurgence in faith, particularly in Gen Z. Are you seeing that as well?
Absolutely. I think really good, solid studies have been done, particularly within the Catholic Church. We see this resurgence in Catholic Mass. We see a lot of younger influencers that are very active in the church. And so I think we see it really across the world in a variety of different spheres. Younger people crave this goodness.
That's very reassuring to hear, especially since there are so many alternatives out there. Again, we're talking with Anna Mays. She's a Young Voices contributor and economics graduate from Grove City College. Anna, for people who want to follow your work or to follow you on social media, where can they find you?
Well, hopefully you'll find me again in a couple of different outlets, but you can follow me at Anna MCQN Mays on Instagram or X.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And we are back on Moving Forward with Young Voices. Happy to welcome a new contributor to the program this week. His name is Bautista Vivanco. Um, Bautista, thank you for joining us today. Tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Oh, thank you so much for having me, Ryan. I'm currently working as a health policy research associate at a think tank here in Washington, D.C. Although I am originally from Argentina, I did my college in the U.S. and I've been here for 6 years now. And I've been studying, been doing research on health policy over the last 10 months.
Very happy to have you on the program. I'm looking
Thank
at
you.
an article that you wrote for Real Clear Politics called The
Mhm.
Empty Outrage Over Medicaid Cuts. And by gosh, I have heard a lot of talk about Medicaid cuts at the federal level, at the state level. I hear it just about everywhere I go. Talk to me. Let's start out at the federal level.
Yes.
There's talk about loss of Medicaid coverage as part of the president's new One Big Beautiful Bill. How does
Mhm.
that all fit in together?
So basically, what's going on, the nuts and bolts of it is that they're going to be starting in 2027 after the midterms next year, of course. We're going to be experiencing work requirements in Medicaid, which means that people that are currently able-bodied adults that are not parents, that they don't have a disability, they're going to have to prove to the different state agencies managing Medicaid that they're engaged with the community. That could be either through education, volunteer work, or by working 20 hours a week. And they will just have to prove that. And according to some estimates by, for instance, the Congressional Budget Office, that extra paperwork, that requirement of these people that they're going to have to show off and indicate what they're doing, it's going to lead to a number of them to not be enrolled anymore for various reasons. And that's going to lead to some reductions in the spending of Medicaid since they're not going to be covered any longer.
So I'm trying to be diplomatic in how I say this, but it sounds like um, a lot of the opposition, and especially a lot of the angry, denouncement that I hear coming from Washington D.C. may be really just making a lot of noise. They're hollering without actually being hurt. Talk to me about the program itself. Is this
Yes.
program as popular with the American public as those who are legislators would lead us to believe? Because boy, they say you can't touch this, or it's political death.
Most certainly. Medicaid is starting to get referred to as the third rail of politics. You touch it and you die, essentially. And what you were saying is correct, that Medicaid is extremely popular amongst politicians because of the way that the program was created. So the way in which Medicaid is financed, which it's almost $1 trillion in $1 trillion wide or $1 trillion big program. The way that it works is that the states will spend a certain amount of money, let's say $1, and then the federal government will pay the states what it's called a refer rate. That could be anywhere between $1 and $9. So what's going on here is that the vast majority of the budget for this program is coming from the federal level, not from the state level. And so the reason why we're seeing all this outrage towards these cuts is because the state's officials are going to see that in order to maintain current levels of Medicaid expenditure, they're going to have to flip the bill themselves. The states will have to do that. And the only way in which that can be done is by raising taxes. And now the fact that nobody is probably going to be raising the taxes to maintain current level of Medicaid expenditure just tells you that people love the benefits that they get as long as they don't pay for it. So current level of Medicaid expenditure is not on par with what the population would be willing to pay in taxes to maintain that level.
All right, you have done a wonderful job of outlining the problem. Let's talk a little bit about the solutions. You address
Absolutely.
some potential solutions that if we were to return to free market economics, there are different ways to approach this. Let's talk about some things that maybe we could be trying.
Well, yes. So one thing that is quite interesting is that it kind of really does depend on what you are trying to achieve with your policy outcomes. So if the main goal that we have with the program is to provide health insurance to lower income people, that there are ways in which we could achieve that. Medicaid is health insurance for people. But if what we're trying to do is to raise the standards of living of people that are experiencing difficulties either through their disability or their age, or because they have to take care of children, one way in which we could potentially achieve that would be, instead of having the government dictate the benefits that they can get, just give them the cash and have the individuals allocate it in whatever way they wanted to. Because if you are a single mother of three that is very close to the poverty limit, uh, perhaps health insurance might not be the most valuable thing for you. You might instead appreciate obtaining something like extra money so that you can move away to a better school district for your children, or that you could buy them whole foods and vegetables and meat, and things that are a little bit more healthy, perhaps even a little more expensive, but more healthy for your kids as well. Um, and now it is interesting because there is a way in which we could do this, in which we improve the lives of the beneficiaries and also reduce the tax burden on the taxpayers. There's been some really interesting research that showcase that every dollar that the government spends on a beneficiary, out of that dollar, the person on Medicaid only sees about 20 to 50 cents in real perceived benefits. So potentially, you could reduce the budget of this program by half, which would be phenomenal for the taxpayer and will help us steer away from a debt crisis, and give that money directly to the individuals. And on average, they would receive the same level of utility, the same level of perceived benefits as the way the program is currently structured.
Interesting. One of the things you point out in your article is that the states also they have to deal with these Medicare or Medicaid rather issues as well. And something that you pointed out here that I think I wish more people understood, the by far the biggest lobbying influence in many state legislators, many state legislatures rather,
Mhm.
is it's the health sector. They've got the money, and so as you point out, this is Medicaid becomes a very handy way to transfer wealth directly from the federal government to that sector.
Well, yeah, I don't blame them. If I was getting all this money from the federal government directly into my pocket, I too would be upset if the fountain
Right.
started to become smaller and smaller. But it is true, as you mentioned, research shows that the majority of the transfer of benefits goes not from the government to the people on Medicaid, but from the government and the providers of healthcare. Uh, and so, yeah, it is truly a shame, but we will see what will be the next reforms that we might have on Medicaid in the future. But there's definitely those are much needed.
I appreciated your treatment too of the one big beautiful bill. Um, that's been a very polarizing issue for a lot of people, including people who may actually be supporters of Donald Trump. But there's some good in that bill, which the treatment toward Medicaid, that's a step in the right direction.
That is true.
However, there's a lot of stuff there too that really isn't doing us a favor, and that is also a part of your excellent article.
Most certainly. It's definitely not perfect, but there are some steps that are in the right direction. Although ultimately, what we need in Washington, D.C. is to have more bipartisan support for more sensible and more level headed politics, looking not just for the next midterms, but for the generations to come as well.
Again, we are visiting with Bautista Vivanco. He's a contributor for Young Voices, as well as a health policy researcher. Bautista, where can people follow you on social media? Where can they find your work?
Well, right now I'm working on setting up my Twitter account, which I think that it's about time that I get one of those. It seems people are having so much fun out there. But in the meantime, you can follow me on LinkedIn. That is Bautista Vivanco. Thank you very much.
Welcome back to Moving Forward with Young Voices. We're happy to welcome a new contributor to this segment. Her name is Imade Iyamu. And first of all, beautiful name. Tell us a little bit about yourself, who you are and what you do.
All right. Thank you so much for having me here, Brian. My name is Imade, and I'm originally from Nigeria. Moved to the US as an international student a few years ago. Got my MBA, and I work as a wealth manager, and I'm also very interested in media arts right now, contributing more towards topics around immigrants, high-skilled immigrants in particular, and working on projects like that. So yeah, it's great to be here and it's great to talk to you.
Well, I'm looking at an article that you wrote for realclearbooks.com. Superman is more than an immigrant tale. And I have to confess, I haven't seen the new Superman movie, but I take it you have.
Yeah, I've seen it now a couple of times, 3 times. Really
It
love.
must be good.
Yes, yes. And I'm definitely a DC Superman fan as well, so that helped.
So let's unpack this just a little bit. First of all, there are a number of different Superman films out there. What is different about this film?
Well, I would say 2 things. One is just it's had the highest grossing opening weekend. So that's definitely people have seen something different about it. But also in the sense of the article that I wrote, with the new direction that James Gunn took it in, there was a bit of debate right before it came out with his statement. So he talked about the fact that Superman is an immigrant story. And so that's what my article is about. It's saying, yes, it is an immigrant story, but it's more than that, which is Superman obviously is an immigrant. He wasn't born in the US. His parents obviously weren't born in the US. But it's more than that, because the reason why Superman is such an endearing character is because he becomes one of us in a way that it shows the power of assimilation. So he's not just someone, if you look at the DC universe, the universe of superheroes, villains, most of them are not, they are immigrants too in that sense. They're aliens, in fact. But in fact, a lot of the villains are aliens and immigrants too. So what makes Superman such an endearing character isn't just the fact that he's born outside the country and an immigrant, but the fact that he becomes one of us. He's born to Jonathan and Martha Kent, given a human name, an American name. He grows up with those strong traditional values. And that's one thing I said in the article. Had he been born to any other family with any other values, he would not be who he is. The reason why Superman is such a beloved character is not really because of his powers necessarily. It's because of the struggles and moral conflicts he faces with those powers and how his values shape his decisions with them. So having the power to really do anything, what should I do? Should I take care of everybody? Is it better if I make them self-reliant? Or do I have the responsibility to shield them from every inconvenience? Do I have that authority to do that? Should I do that? So these kind of moral conflicts, you can directly see in a way how the US also, especially now, is grappling with those conflicts. We're blessed with so many resources and abundance, but there are people within the US, outside the US, that could be helped. What is the best way to direct those resources? How should you help people? What is the right things to do? So these are the things that make the story, the movie, and the character so compelling. And I argue in the article that that's what the story is really about. It's about assimilation. It's about becoming an American in who you are. And that's something I think we're not really talking about today in the conversation nationally about immigration. It's all about, the technicalities, which are important. How did you come into the country, the border, legal status? But if we think about it, everyone who is already here should have a pathway towards assimilating. And it's a two-way thing. I have to want to be, as an immigrant coming to America, I have to want to, inculcate myself into the values of my new home. And the people too have to be welcoming to me. It cannot just be one directional. So I argue that we aren't really talking about this because as an immigrant myself, that's something I experienced with other people being willing to welcome me, but also myself making that first step of, oh, how do I, or this place that I'm in, what is the history? What are the people like? What are the traditions? How do I contribute? And then people, giving me that welcoming hand of, showing me how to do these things. So it's not a conversation that we're talking more about. When you talk about the consternation recently towards immigration or conflicting attitudes towards it, I think it really does boil down to, I don't know the person who is my next door neighbor. It's becoming a low trust environment because people are not being assimilated the way that they should be. So I would like to, I think I just used this Superman, and I found it a great moment for us to sit back and reflect on these things that may be difficult conversations, but I think it's something that we don't talk about barely as much as we should.
There's a beautiful line in this article, and it actually pertains to your own experience in coming here first as a student and then becoming a permanent resident rather. You say the story isn't just about coming to America; it's about what happens after you arrive, which is really that's if we wanted to take a lot of the contention out of the immigration issue.
Yeah.
That's got to be one of the things that they focus on. I think there are people who are coming here for all the right reasons. There are some people who want to come here for, nefarious reasons, but I think more people want to come here for the right reasons. And because of that, I would love to see them come and assimilate and obtain whatever they are willing to work, to obtain.
Yeah, I think there's also this thing of a kind of a misconception, both culturally, that, oh, there's no real American culture. And in a way, it's what makes America able to, bring some of the greatest people around the world to come here. But as someone so I remember in 2023, when I was still a student, I basically traveled around the country, and I would say there's so many different cultures and there's so many different types of people. Even every different state, it's like its own mini country in that sense. But there definitely is an American culture. There are definitely similarities. There's definitely a binding feeling. There are definitely things that you should know about, or if we're speaking outside of the country as Americans, we would recognize some similarities in the things that we're saying. That's a culture in and of itself. And there are certain values that people do share. So I think there should be formal ways of doing this, the way that there are formal immigration structures, but there should also, more importantly, be a culture of, as an immigrant, I want to, learn this culture and immerse myself in it and become one of them. And as someone who is already a citizen, I want to welcome people who have that open spirit.
One of the things that's very powerful about your article is what makes Superman really, special is he chooses he basically chooses, these are my people. And I'm going to kind of just pose that question to you in terms of for immigrants, what would help them to want to make that choice to say, these are my people? If there is no clearly definable American culture, what are some of the ways that they can still say, you know what, because of this, the American people are now my people?
Yeah, I think that's one reason that the legal immigration system is so important, and going through that process. People do complain about it and there's a lot to fix. But I think in that sense, going through that process, so there are a lot of, on the way, there's a lot of kind of checks, balances, things like that. These are the things that make you reflect, why am I even doing this? Before you become once you're a permanent resident for a number of years and then you naturalize as a citizen, it's not automatic. You still have to do things like the citizenship test. So in that formal sense, you're thinking about, why do I care about this? So those roadblocks, I think, in a sense, give you a sense of, why am I doing this, and is it worth it? And it kind of separates, in a sense, the true believers of the values and the mission. But also, I think in a cultural sense, it would just be the kind of bonds that you're able to form. And that's why I think the first step is actually from the person who comes in themselves, because you have to willingly not stay within certain enclaves. It's very possible for you to just stay within certain immigrant groups, but you need to, purposely push yourself to immerse yourself in the new place that you're in. And there should be ways of people kind of encouraging that. I think that would be the best way to do that.
Again, we have been visiting with Imade Iyamu. Thank you so much. What a wonderful article.
Thank you so much for your time, Brian. Love talking to you.
Welcome back to Moving Forward with Young Voices. This is our fourth and final segment today. Happy to welcome a new contributor. His name is Nicholas Armstrong. Nicholas, this is our first time meeting you. Take a moment and tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, well, thank you for having me on your show today, Brian. I'm Nicholas Armstrong, and I am a policy analyst that studies primarily healthcare, and then I dabble in family policy here in Austin, Texas, at the Texas Public Policy Foundation.
Marvelous. And I'm looking at an article that you wrote for TexasPolicy.com. Reductions in Medicaid spending are here. Is Texas's private safety net ready? Now, this actually is going to tie in with a couple of other segments we've done on the show today, but we were talking about Medicaid cuts and how, this is great political fodder in Washington, D.C., and there's a lot of angst and a lot of press conferences taking place over it. But the states have a say in this matter as well. Talk to me about how this is shifting more responsibility to the states, and how does Texas stack up as far as their readiness to take on responsibilities like this?
Yeah, well, that's an excellent question, Brian. And yeah, it's a lot of going back in the summer with President Trump's One Big Beautiful Bill, trying to target that waste, fraud, and abuse that is in Medicaid and reducing that spending. And I would also like to point out that Medicaid will actually continue to grow. There are no actual real cuts, if you will, because it will still continue to grow as a program, which is kind of scary, thinking that you can cut $1 trillion from a program and it will still continue to grow. That just kind of shows how much money we actually do spend on healthcare. And so with those reductions on the federal level, states actually have a private safety net, because we remember that Medicaid is actually by its own admission, is an insurer of last resort. It is the public safety net. And so with the reductions in spending there, states actually have their own private safety nets that that nonprofit hospitals afford on the state level through what's called as charity care, or this is a financial assistance policy. Part of the social contract agreement that nonprofit hospitals have is they're exempt from basically all state, federal taxes, and then with those tax exemptions, they provide what's called community benefit, and arguably the most important one is lowering the costs of healthcare for the uninsured or low-income patients in whatever particular state that they're in. Now, I have the privilege of being in Texas, and the Hospital Association here has stated that Texas actually has the gold standard for charity care. And then, so I dove into that. I've spent about the last 2 years digging into that, about what that actually looks like. And I've been finding some troubling statistics and information about our gold standard that we have here in Texas. And there are ways the legislature can address some of those shortfalls.
Talk to me about, I'd like to know a little bit more about how these nonprofit hospitals, first of all, this isn't something new. Is this traditionally something that they have done? And what percentage of hospitals operate as nonprofit? I'm just curious. I never would have thought of this in terms of wait, they're already doing stuff like this. How long has it been going on?
Yeah, so the first one, the first kind of charity care. This has happened for decades and decades. That nonprofit hospitals have been exempt from these, have been tax exempt, and it's part of what they are under federal law in the IRS code, that they have to provide community benefit and this free or heavily discounted care for patients that live in those states. And roughly 58% of all hospitals in America are nonprofit. And so allegedly this social safety net should be available to millions of Americans, but we've actually done polling, particularly in Texas, that that 87% of Texans are unaware that charity care actually exists. And this is a state of 32 million people. So you're talking by far and away, the vast majority of people don't even know that this program actually exists, and it's created to help the low-income and uninsured patients who, with the reductions in Medicaid spending, there's going to be more people who possibly lose their health care coverage. Maybe they go find coverage through their employer. Perhaps they are not properly enrolled or that they're not eligible for the program. And so this is just one way that states, particularly Texas, can really shore up and ensure that the social safety net really absorbs those people who do qualify and are eligible for this program.
Nicholas, talk to me about the thresholds that people would need to be at in order to qualify for for charity care.
Mhm.
I was looking at your article, and these figures are actually kind of surprising.
Yes. So there's really kind of two metrics. Kind of the industry standard, if you will, is so generally patients who make less than 200% of the federal poverty level. That's around for a single person. That's around I believe it's around 50,000, somewhere around there, which is the vast majority of Americans. Kind of fall within that income threshold or have around that income, and so those patients are typically eligible to have it completely written off for their care, written off for when they go to the hospital, when they apply for it, or when they can apply for it. Now, kind of that income bracket from 201% to 400%, that's where you can have your care discounted. And it kind of takes into a little bit of context of, low income, making sure that you don't have, some offshore, accounts over in Switzerland or something. So
Right.
they do background checks of to ensure that, that the money and these discounts are going to individuals who do qualify for it. But 400% of the federal poverty level, that is roughly $62,000 for a single person, and for a family of four, which is about the average size of a family in the U.S., is $102,000. And so, and there was an American Enterprise Institute chart of the century updated that came out and showed that hospital services have increased from general inflation around 220%. So hospital services have dramatically increased over the past decade or 2 decades, and charity care could be a way to bring down some of those costs that families everywhere in Texas are experiencing.
I'm just blown away, from your article here on income alone. Over 93 million Americans could qualify for charity care. That's astonishing. Now, we've only got about a minute and a half left here. Let's talk about moving ahead for Texas. How well are they positioned, to weather cuts in Medicaid at the federal level? That's a massive state. Are they able to shrug this off where smaller states like Wyoming, would struggle?
So, that's a very good question, and Texas can weather this storm a little bit better than other states. It's not necessarily between big state and small state. It's more so a fact of expansion state, those who have expanded Medicaid versus those who have not expanded Medicaid. And so Texas isn't going to be as hit as much with the reductions in Medicaid spending as say a California or a New York that has really that has expanded Medicaid, but Texas surely is going to feel the cuts of Medicaid spending, and people are more than likely going to lose their healthcare coverage, and they'll still need a way to pay for the services for the healthcare that they need. And charity care is going to be and should be one of those ways where we hold nonprofit hospitals accountable for the social contract that they have entered into with the state and to serve the people in their communities.
All right, Nicholas, this is an article that covers a lot of topics that I don't know if people talk about them nightly, at their dinner table, but they probably should be, because it affects an awful lot of us. For people who want to follow you or who wish to connect with you on social media, where can they find your work and where can they find you?
Yeah, so you can follow me on X at Nick Strong 901. And I'm on our Texas Policy website, texaspolicy.com, where you can see all of my articles and different white papers that I have.
Again, we're talking with Nicholas Armstrong. Thanks again. This really sheds some light on a topic which now I feel like I understand a little bit better, and I hope everybody else does as well.
Thank you for having me.